Hi, I'm Karen. We're here at Montavilla Sewing Center, and today we're talking about the Baby Lock Verve. In this video, I'm going to get you started on the sewing side of it. Now, when you first turn on your machine, you're probably going to see this screensaver. The way to get into stitches, just touch the screen and it gets you right into there. Now, there is a way in the settings menu to get it so that when you turn on your machine, this is the screen you see. So I do have a video on the settings. You can watch that. And also I have another video on how to thread your machine. So those two videos are a good place to start. For getting started on sewing, now most of the time I've noticed in my sewing career, most of the time I use a straight stitch and a zigzag. Sometimes I use some decorative stitches and often I do buttonholes, but usually straight stitch and zigzag as the second one. So what we have here is a variety of straight stitches. Now, why do we have that? That's because you have side needle position, which if I chose that one, you see the needle is off to the left. We have center needle position, and now it's in the center. Now you can still move the needle over side to side, and I will show you how to do that in a minute. But what that has to do with is where these lines match up. So like if I wanted to do a 5/8 inch seam allowance, I would match up my seam, my edge of my fabric, with this line right here if I'm in center needle position. Now if I'm in side needle position, it's a different line. To make it easier to figure that out is if you have if you run the edge of your fabric right along there and there, you can see. Actually, that will give you your 5/8 inch from the left needle position. Okay, I prefer the middle one. Also, you can use a foot like this, and this does make it easier. This is a foot that you can get that has this guide here. If you leave it on there where it goes, match it up to that line as long as you're in the center needle position, and you sew your 5/8 inch seam allowance. All you've got to do is watch, keep the edge of your fabric right there, and it will give you your 5/8 inch seam allowance. Now I like to go a little slower. When you're getting to know your machine, slow it down a little bit, and that's good. All right. And then of course we can always do a back stitch. Just press and hold your back stitch, let it up. And notice it stops with the needle down. If I push the cutter button, it lifts up the needle and cuts the threads like that. Now, I could also have just pushed the needle up button, lifted up my presser foot, and cut the threads over here on the side cutter. That's another way to do that. Now, why do you have two different center needle positions and two different sides? That is if you use this button here. Watch the magic. I'm going to show you this. This is really wonderful. Go this way. Start sewing. It gives an automatic back stitch. Notice I didn't have to push that button there. And then at the end, remember not to sew off the edge of your fabric, just press this. It does an automatic back stitch. I don't have to have my foot on the pedal. I don't have to push the button. I can do this. Now, I can also combine that with this little cutter, which means once it does that automatic back stitch, it's going to cut the thread. Does everything for me. It's a really neat feature. So you can turn those on or off. If you do not have that one on, you're not going to have the cutter on either. So, because it wouldn't know when you're done. To cut your thread, you can always do this. And of course, you can always use your scissors if you want to. That's great. Okay, so that would explain a little bit about what those are. Now, I'm going to go back to the regular foot. And remember, this is an extra accessory. This is your regular foot. Well, what is that little knob? People keep asking me, what's this little knob for? That is, if you are sewing over something really thick and you're sewing along and the foot kind of bogs down right there, what you can do, so I'm going to go needle down with that, push down on the front toes of that foot, and then you can put push in that little knob, and it holds that foot level so it can go right across that seam. That's what that little knob is for. I'm going to just take that out of there because I don't want to sew through my sample. You've also got extra lift in your presser foot lever, so you can lift it up a little higher if you need to. Okay, so a lot of you are quilters. So if you want to do a 1/4 inch seam allowance, if you have center needle position, there is the line that you would use for doing your 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now, there's another way, and that is with this foot. This is also accessory, but I really like this foot because it has this little fence guide on the side. I'm going to show you how that works. Put this guy on there. And notice it also has one of these little knobs in the back. So if you're quilting and you come to a seam where you've got lots of seams crossing right at that seam allowance, well, this is going to tip up. You can push that in just like I did with the regular foot, glide right across that thick area on your fabric, on your quilt. So what this will do is it'll give you 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now, well, I'm going to just go ahead and show you that. So what I'm doing is I'm watching right here. Sewing straight is a lot about knowing where to watch and guide in it and going slow enough so that you can sew accurately. A big test here. So I'm going to use my seam gauge, put that right there at 1/4 inch, and there you go. It's at 1/4 inch. Now, this foot is really nice in that you can actually make a scant 1/4 inch or a generous 1/4 inch by moving your needle over, which brings up a question. How do we move the needle over? Side to side. How do we lengthen since we don't have any dials here? That's this little guy right here. If you push that, now you can move your needle over. So watch what happens to the needle. See how I'm moving it to one side or the other? You can actually press and hold it, and it will step along like that. You can change your stitch length. For quilting, we usually have a shorter stitch length, so you can change it that way. Now notice when it's in default, it has white numbers on a black background. When it's not in default, it's the opposite, black numbers on a white background. What if I had changed everything, but I want to put it back to default again? I just push that little kind of square with a corner chopped off. That's what that means. Now, let's say I change something and move this over and push OK, and you're back into that screen. It has left that stitch where it is. Now, if you reselect the stitch, it puts it back into default. That's another way to do it. Now, there was a third thing up here, and that's this left-right shift. What's that all about? I'll show you. If you are going into zigzag, I'm going to put my foot back on here. Like that. Okay. So that was on page 2. So page 1 was this. Page 2 is where you have your zigzags. You've actually got 5 pages, and this is in the utility stitch area. You've also got where, if you have this one and you've chosen this stitch, it's going to give you that back stitch at the beginning. If you've chosen this stitch, it gives you a locking stitch in place. Same thing with these over here. That's a locking stitch at the beginning. I'm going to show you what that looks like. Okay, let's just go for the center needle position. Now, I'm going to slow it way down so you can see. Locking stitch. Okay. And it goes forward, and I'm going to speed it up a little bit more. And when I'm at the end, I just press this. It does a locking stitch at the end. Okay. Now, a locking stitch is just basically a stitch in place. Now, I notice that the feed dogs do move slightly, so it gives you a nice little knot on the bottom. And you can start sewing without pulling up your bobbin thread. It just leaves that tiny little thread tail. All you really need to do at this point is snip the thread on the top, snip these 2 threads close, but not all the way up to the knot on the bottom, and that's 2 less thread snips than what you normally need to do. Okay, same thing on your whichever one of these stitches that you choose for zigzag. Now, to widen and narrow your zigzag, you can widen it this way, and notice how it actually shows you in the picture what that looks like. You can narrow it, you can lengthen it. The left-right shift means it keeps the width and length the same, but it moves the entire stitch over. Now, if I showed you that in straight stitch, it wouldn't really make any sense because we haven't changed the width of the straight stitch. But in zigzag, that's a really helpful thing if you are trying to maintain that zigzag width, but you want it a little closer to the edge of your fabric, for instance. Okay, and again, to put it back to default, that little button right there is how you do that. Okay, so Notice I pushed the back button. I could have also pushed OK. So another thing I want to show you is if, let's say you were exploring the buttons on your machine and you got into this. Okay, by the way, it says, gives you a cancel stitch, and I did that. And then you get back into this, and oh, where's my screen to choose my stitches? All you need to know is this shows the categories, the big overall categories. This one is your utility stitches, number 1. There you go. We're right back into where we need to be. Okay, I'm going to go back into that, and now you can see you've got various different categories. You've got cross stitches and satin stitches and various decorative stitches, and you have buttonholes up here, 3 pages of buttonholes of different kinds, mending stitches, eyelet stitches, bar tack, all sorts of things. And to get back into straight stitch, what do? Go here, choose number 1. So that is straight stitch and zigzag and sort of some overall things that you need to know for getting started on your machine. I sure hope that this has been a helpful video. If it has, give us a thumbs up. And if you have comments or questions, you can leave those in the area below. Study your book. It's going to give you a lot of good information, but watch my other videos too. We have a lot of videos on this machine and on other machines here on our Montavilla YouTube channel, so stay tuned. Thanks for watching. Bye.